Hello and welcome. I am Lee Hopper, CEO here at the CCMA, and I am delighted to be joined by Tim Burton. He is the newly appointed Chief Customer Officer at Smart Numbers. Hello, Tim.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me in from your fabulous offices as well. I see you've got your brand behind you there.
Absolutely. On brand, on point.
On brand, on point. Now, fraud is on the rise. We know that. We've seen it on the rise since the pandemic. We're seeing it on the rise because of tech. And it is coming out in so many different forms. And I know that you guys at Smart Numbers are really trying your best to support contact centres to help them tackle it. And so, Tim, I'm really pleased that you're going to have a chat with me here live on LinkedIn about a few things, actually. One, around what got you into wanting to work a little bit more around fraud, but also you're going to share some advice a little bit later, I hope, for contact centre leaders who are tackling this right now. But first of all, Tim, you've been responsible for tackling fraud in the contact centre for quite a while, from what I can make out, and I know that you've used some of your experiences to help other contact centre leaders to reduce risk. You've been a contact centre leader yourself, and have been responsible for reducing risk. But I have to ask, what was it that got you into fraud? That sounds awful. What got you into trying to tackle the challenges of fraud in the first place?
Yeah, really good question. And I think there's a general theme when you speak to fraud practitioners that most people have stumbled into the fraud ecosystem by accident. That certainly was the case with me. My first full-time job was in a contact center handling inbound calls in the fraud department. And I stumbled across that role purely for the fact that, you generally got paid more per hour in the fraud department than you did in other areas, just because of the nature of the risk. And a couple of weeks into my role in the contact center, I was speaking to a gentleman who I thought was a victim of fraud, a customer, took them through all the processes I'd been trained to take them through, the right ID&V levels, identified that the customer had safeguards on their account, and the caller convinced me that they were the customer. And I, in hindsight, was a terrible thing, removed safeguards from the account, apologized for the inconvenience, for declining transactions that he was trying to make. And it was only a few weeks later that I was kind of whipped into the office by the leadership team in the contact center to say that by removing those safeguards from the account, I'd actually labelled the fraudster who I'd spoken to steal just shy of £60,000. And that just it hit me really hard, because the thing that I naturally just kind of said was, but I followed the process. And I was hooked at that stage because I was fascinating at the level of manipulation that I just suffered from. I was naive to the world of fraud because I joined a contact center to service customers. And whilst I'd been told about the risks, it's only really, when you actually see or feel the exposure to that risk that you actually start to realize how fraudsters work and why they choose the channels that they choose to achieve certain goals with financial organizations. And so from then on, and that was 18 years ago, I've never actually left the fraud authentication ecosystem, because there's just so many evolving challenges to tackle. The fraudsters are always a couple of steps ahead. They don't have the same constraints that we have, because they don't have the concept of customer service, and so the exploitation is always king. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey across that time, but it really was triggered from being in a contact center as an agent, following process and still achieving the wrong result. It's 18 years on. I feel like we've learned a few more stories along the way.
And I know you've got so many stories, and anybody that's listening, they should pick up the phone to you and get you to share some of those stories, because you have been in strategy and policy, and you've also become a bit more of a domain expert in the technologies that are available to really tackle this from a contact center perspective. But you also worked at Santander for a while, and in particular, you headed up the future fraud strategy. Is there anything you can share? And I'm very aware that when you're sharing, you can't share too many secrets, but is there anything you can share around what might go in a fraud strategy today? Or what maybe you can
absolutely. There's a few simple things I guess I can share. in any strategy, really, what you're looking for is the best way of managing the current attack that you're suffering from, using controls that can be applied in the constraints of your business. And if you take the contact center as an example, mainly the constraints are around resource. There's very strict measures in place around the average handle time for a certain type of call, what shrinkage you apply to agents, how agents need to navigate screens and follow process. And so when we think about a strategy, my role at Santander was really to look at the midterm plan, which is year 2 through to year 5 of a 5-year strategy. And then the core strategy team kind of looked after the in-year combating of the current state attack. And so over my shoulder, I was constantly looking at the current attack vectors that we were seeing. But then looking forward, you have to have a very good understanding for what technologies exist within the ecosystem that you may be able to use, an understanding as to what the business aspirations are, because it's very important that you have other leadership peers that you have to work with, mainly people that focus on consumer experience, that manage operations, that manage regulatory compliance and overall budgeting. So there's a number of stakeholders you have to manage there. But really, I guess the fundamental thing is about making sure that you implement and operationalize controls in a way that's proportionate to understanding that trade-off between experience and risk mitigation. And so setting a vision for the business that demonstrated a tangible relationship with other stakeholders' business objectives, is informed by what the industry has available to be able to consume, and then also has a clear line for how you integrate that capability in your technology partnerships. Those are the main areas of focus. And going one level down, I would say there are 2 main areas that I explored in anger within the contact center. There was biometric information, so being able to introduce voice biometrics, both passive and active, and also good and bad, but also network layer intelligence, and being able to really understand the true identity of a caller based on forensic information that's available upstream before a call lands in an organization, and that setting a strategy around understanding how to use that technology was very much at the heart of the role there.
That's fascinating. And when you use phrases like the current attack, the word attack, it's quite scary. And I was watching, there's a BBC program at the moment, The Scam Interceptors, and I was watching that the other night, and it's really scary seeing call centers, arguably from elsewhere around the world, who's not to say it's not happening in the UK, but call centers that are set up specifically targeting consumers and bullying them into paying money to get out of a legal situation. You're going to get arrested unless you pay us money. Now that's obviously one way that they're doing it. That's and frankly not helping our reputation in the industry at all. But how are contact centers being targeted? How is that working the other way around at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so one of the big things I think the industry has as a gap is being able to understand the multiple touch points that a criminal organization actually carry out across multiple channels before ultimately the end goal is achieved. And that end goal often is either the acquisition of high-end goods in the retail space, the provisioning of insurance policies with the wrong information in, for example, the motor industry, or the extraction of funds within the banking or financial sector. Now, the one key thing I would just say is that contact centers, they are a playground for 2 or 3 things. First and foremost, reconnaissance. What we mean by reconnaissance is really about being able to leverage things like IVR technologies to be able to validate data that's been stolen from other locations. So, for example, criminal gets hold of information on the dark web that may have come from a data compromise from a large organization. They may have the month and year of a date of birth, but they want to be able to enrich that month and year with the date. So they may hit the IVR up to 31 times from the same phone line, and they'll change with a script the date of that date of birth. At some point, the IVR is going to give that caller a different experience because they got it right. And at that stage, the call is terminated. So being able to validate and enrich information that has been compromised from somewhere else adds to the value of the data that could be sold to an alternative gang for alternative means in the ecosystem. And a key area where, automation and automation technology in the contact center actually starts to create a problem for data theft. The second big area that we see a tremendous amount of concerns around are what we call the preparation for an attack. And this may be where an organization has a caller adding a beneficiary or a power of attorney to an account, altering the notification statuses so people don't get push notifications to the app anymore, or changing the address or the phone number on an account. And what they're doing there is preparing to then attack or extract funds or provision services as an end state. And with a huge amount of positive desire, people are trying to move as many of those higher risk tasks into self-service. And so again, those reconnaissance attacks become reconnaissance and preparation attacks in a more automated manner. And now you wouldn't necessarily recognize that that's a problem, because a lot of genuine people call and say, hey, I've got a new phone number, or I would like to add my niece to my account because I'm struggling to I have an underlying mental health problem or a disability that means that I need support. And it's typically the most vulnerable customers that use the contact center channel to be able to get those things sorted, because they're typically things that don't really get serviced in digital environments. And so fraudsters are exploiting that. And then the final point is really the cash out. And what we mean by the cash out is that the money is extracted or the goods are provisioned either via an instruction in the contact center or via a different channel, but that was facilitated by the preparation or reconnaissance that occurred within the contact center channel. And I think the biggest challenge is that a lot of organizations have focused their posturing on the digital space only, and they haven't necessarily appreciated that there's actually a significant overlap. We see it in our data here at Smart Numbers. There's a significant overlap in the touch points of criminals in the contact center before digital transactions occur. And that's actually something that I think is a big problem, because it's not well understood in the industry. And if something isn't well understood in the industry, it means investment opportunity doesn't exist. It becomes a lot more difficult for leaders to lobby and to identify ways of funding innovation to be able to start to combat these challenges.
Wow. You mentioned earlier that if you are using technology to tackle these fraudsters, we've actually got to find the right balance between the customer experience and tackling fraud. And you mentioned there around fraudsters are using the fact that it's vulnerable people that might be calling into a contact center to make a change to an account, and that's one of the weak points. But how big is this as an issue in the contact center? Are we seeing it that 1 in 10 calls, God forbid, is a fraudster trying to get in, and how is it different across different sectors? Are we seeing that it's more prevalent? No surprise in financial services, but what does that landscape look like?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's a few things there. So there are a number of statistics that you can kind of reference that are relatively, pretty available to people. The fraud facts that come from UK Finance is a fantastic reference point. In there, we talk about the year-on-year scale and size of the scam problem. The last report that came out later last year, reported 65 to 67 million pounds of scam fraud alone reported in the financial sector. Now, other markets don't have the same regulatory reporting requirements as financial institutions, and so it's not that the problem doesn't exist, but there are fewer places to be able to aggregate information from multiple members to be able to tell that industry story. But what we've identified at Smart Numbers is that 61% of the confirmed frauds that we've seen through our consortium have had touch points in the contact center before the financial attack occurred. So we know that essentially more than 1 in every 2 attacks have manipulated the contact center in some way. What we also recognize is it's the same underlying groups of individuals that are attacking multiple verticals, different industries. And we have, one fraud attack that we recently helped an organization with. I won't name names, but the same gang were targeting one of our telco customers to essentially order handsets and provision numbers. And then they were subsequently using those numbers to then manipulate the contact center for a bank to be able to prepare for a financial extraction. And so in that scenario, there were actually two losses, a loss of a handset and data within the telco sector, and there's a loss there that's been bared, and also a financial loss within the financial sector ecosystem. And when you look at it that way, what we've really seen in our consortium is that the known frauds or known criminals to an organization that actually is pretty good at managing their own data, there is 10 to 1 more matches in criminals that have targeted one other customer and are essentially showing the same MO to 2, 3, 4 other banks when you start to collaborate in data. And so if you think about 10% of your attack surface can be detected just using your own data, and then you move up to 100% through the consortium type view, that's a massive multiplier. And I think that the gap there is that what we haven't done as an industry is overlay the ability to start to throttle and manage risk differently in the contact center, and then understanding the downstream consequence and impact on things like the handset problem or things like the financial cash out problem in those sectors. And that's an area that I'm particularly passionate about, because I do think we're now of an age where technology allows us to stitch these things together in a much easier manner to tell that story.
And I know that we've got a number of things going on in 2024 where you're going to be meeting with some of our members through some of our special interest group that we've launched specifically to help contact centres tackling the fraud issue. And I know you're joining us on a couple of leadership forums to speak to senior leaders and talk with senior leaders, hear the challenges that they're going through and to help navigate this. But for the purposes of today, can you give us 3 top things, top tips, top things that people can be doing today to really try and tackle this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's difficult to make it 3. Absolutely, any individual should be placing layered defenses in. The attack vectors change on a regular basis, and without having layered controls and agility behind the way you manage and configure those controls, the true customer, the genuine customer, will always suffer. So the 3 things I would just say is, first and foremost, start with network level intelligence. Network level intelligence tells you about the origination of the caller, not what's presented to you as an organization. So that allows you to really understand who's behind the CLI, who's behind the mask. There's plenty of capabilities out there that enable you to be able to do that. That are compliant with things like Ofcom regulations and carrier instructions. So start there, because that's the widest part of the funnel when it comes to really capturing the biggest data set that you can potentially analyze. The second thing is empower your agents. We talk a lot about systems, but systems are only one part of the problem. 99.9% of the calls that you service are genuine calls, right? Do not lose sight of that, because one large fraud number was placed in a report, because there's an even bigger number alongside it that doesn't have the word fraud on it, but is really what drives the value and experience that most organizations really instill in the culture of why they do business the way they do it. And I've seen a real spectrum of organizations that have invested in agent empowerment. If you can create an environment that is conversational between controls and risks and insights that you glean from different systems, but you present them in a way that is informative and guides agents through a process that they can easily follow, you stand a better chance of minimizing the probability of what I went through when I joined my journey, and letting the bad guy in and saying no to the good person. And, it's still fascinating kind of fast forwarding over 15 years and seeing the same legacy set up for agents that I experience as a user still in place with a lot of large organizations today. So you absolutely need to make sure that you have an inclusive environment for agents, and it's empowering. It makes it much easier to bring these types of technologies to the table and use them properly. And the final thing I would say is have a think about how you can collaborate with your peers, right? These are gangs that are targeting you all. They're not just targeting one of you. You might think that you don't have the best controls, or you might think you have the best controls, but actually there is power in data sharing and intelligence gathering. Make sure that you're collaborating in the right way, and make sure that any technology providers you work with have a friendly neighbor ecosystem philosophy where they want to collaborate with people, even if they are competing, technology providers. For you, your ecosystem needs to demonstrate the ability for data to flow smoothly and for you to be able to collaborate internally across systems and externally with other partners. So to summarize, go to the top of the funnel, get network level data, present things in a way that is inclusive and empowering of your agents, and then collaborate the hell out of the data, because that's where you'll really bring speed to insight. It'll allow you to execute a lot faster on decisions you need to take. Those would be kind of, in a whistle-stop tour, the 3 kind of top tips that I would say you need to have in your strategy for this year.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, what did it feel like right at the start of your career when you lost that 60K for that organization, well, for that customer? What did it feel like?
Shame would be the word, if I'm honest, because there was not one person, whether it be the customer or your peers or your managers inside, that you believe you did a good job for. You feel like you let everyone down. You also question whether you can do your job, right? And it's not acceptable in this day and age for an agent to feel that, because the technology is so much different. So what is a shame is the shame should move to organizations that haven't done something about it, right, and invested in the right ways. And
what would you advise any frontline advisor that goes through this themselves today? What would you advise they do?
Challenge convention, right? 90% of processes were built to manage a failure that occurred in the past. And they were built based on the best information or people that wrote the process at the time. Obviously, there's a way to challenge convention, right? So behaviors and soft skills are very important. But you are the most equipped individual to understanding what's truly important at a sentiment level for that caller. Your feedback is the most important feedback any operational leader can get. So you need to challenge convention, because nothing is perfect and everything changes. And actually, you're sat on the gold mine of information, because no one will get through the level of quality and information and dialogue that you have. Second thing is, always represent the customer. Don't ever stop representing the customer, because the people you serve in a contact center are typically the highest risk and the most vulnerable. And you're typically the last line of defense, particularly as branches and bricks and mortar organizations are shutting up at great speed. Everything that happened there is moving into the contact center. So, own the customer and challenge convention internally.
Tim, thank you so much for sharing both what you went through as a newbie in the contact center world, but also what you've done about it and how you are making a difference. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and I can't wait to see what difference you make over the course of the next 12 months or longer with some of the stuff that you're certainly doing with us. Tim, Smart Numbers, thank you so much for your support, and thank you guys for watching.
Thank you. Cheers.